Hi guys, thanks for joining our course on mud crab vertical farming. In the previous lecture, we have looked at the different supply chain from harvest to end consumer and the typical time it takes the crab to move from each location. In this lecture, we will now understand the typical capital expenditure and operating expenditure for running a crab farm and how to estimate your return on investment on a vertical crab farm. So the typical capital cost of setting up the crab farm will include the following item. Firstly, you need to factor in the prices of the crab houses and all of the pipings that you're going to need to run to connect in between all of the boxes. Thirdly, you're going to need your RAS system. So that could be your filters that is made either from a sand or a drum filter, K1 which is your biofiltration, UV will be your disinfection, and any other auxiliary equipment. That will also need to include pumps and any aerators or even a protein skimmer. You would also need to perform some sort of civil work on your site to ensure that you either have a subsequent elevation for the boxes in order for the fluids to flow from the boxes into the pond. So for us, how much do we actually spend on building up the system? This is our first initial capital cost details. So all of the crab house, sand filter, UV filter, pumps and piping, it was all from the Chinese manufacturer. And the price to get it onto our doorstep was about 70,000 ringgit. Note that we are working in ringgit Malaysia, so do your appropriate conversions to your individual countries. We spent about 1,000 ringgit on piping, and the K1 filter we had on our system was about 7,000 ringgit. And in total, civil works is spent about 4,000, which brings us about 82,000 ringgit. That is slightly above 20,000 US dollars. So this is for our first try. We made some mistakes along the way. We would highly recommend to take a look at our system and see where are the areas you could typically cut costs. So in our case, we'll be running a vertical farm, but our farm is mainly used for crab fattening. So you can also do that for soft shell crab or crab fattening, or even if you would like to try out to do grow out from 100 grams or 50 grams up the way to 300 grams. So for our case, I will be presenting in this case crab fattening, and we will give you an interactive Excel sheet for you to help to model different objectives. So the operating costs of running a crab farm are, for example, manpower, that's first, utilities, feed, any salt. So for those who are planning to run this away from the coast, you're going to need salt to bring up the salinity of the water. So how do you get brackish water? You mix salt along with fresh water to get what we call salt water. And you're going to need testing kits and also have to include rentals and maintenance. So if you're running a crab fattening plant, so we will first start off with a few assumptions. Firstly is you're going to run about 800 crabs. Why 800? Because at times it's difficult to run up to full capacity. You're going to have some spare capacity that you might leave 1 or 2 blocks that are open, for incoming shipment. And sometimes if you feel that the first top 2 rows is too high, or any other case, you're not going to run at 100% capacity. So let's assume that you're going to run at 800 crabs instead of your full 1,000 crab boxes. The fattening cycle is about 45 days with a mortality about 15%. Right now we are doing about 10 to 20%, and our fattening cycle is about 30 days. And the feed to weight ratio is about 2 to 3%. So in this case, I'm presenting a B2B. B2B is business that you are essentially selling crabs to restaurants and not to end consumer. So in a separate presentation, I'll show you what are the differences. So we know that water crabs generally retail for about 30 to 40% discount on top of the original selling price. So which gives us about a selling price of 65, and we can buy water crabs usually for 42. Note that for this case, we are actually buying it at a much lower price, and our cycle time is also faster, and our feed to weight ratio is also less, and our mortality is lower. But I'm running a conservative case, and you would see that the first thing is, if I'm running this sort of scenario, what you'll realize is the operating cost, the rental, will cost you about 450. Testing kits will make an additional 100 ringgit per month. Manpower, you'll be hiring 1 guy to run all of this. So 1 guy can run up to 2,500 boxes. That's also possible. You just have to feed every day and just clean out the boxes. The next will be electricity. Water will be also another aspect to take consideration, and this is the amount of feed that you're going to need to sort of feed your 800 crabs in your system. So this is a total operating cost of about 6,300. So one thing you realize is for the revenue per cycle, it's about 25,000, which you will include the selling the dead crabs for a certain price. So in Malaysia, there's a market for dead crabs. You could sell them to those who are extracting for meat, or you could either sell them to end consumers that do not mind eating dead crabs. So the crab cost per cycle, this is your what we call the cost required to buy crabs, and you will see the expenses you need is about 6,000, so which gives you about 24,000. So you realize your profit cycle is only about 500 ringgit per month, which brings us to a ROI of 200 months. So as you can see, this is very high. This takes about 10 years to break even your return on investment. So this is not likely to be viable. So what if I change now? In the previous lectures, we've also talked about economy of scale. So we've talked that 1,000 boxes might not be the most economical, as you do not really have scale. So what happens if you scale up to 5,000 boxes per se? So assuming everything else is the same, I only effectively utilize 80% of my boxes. I have a mortality of 15%, cycle rate of 45 days, and a feed to weight ratio of 2%. And similarly, my cost price is 42 ringgit per kilo, and I sell them at 65 ringgit per kilo. Alright, so usually we do not only farm one sort of crab, we are splitting them out into different ranges. So what you can see generally now is the price of the rental will multiply by 5 times, testing kits will multiply by 5 times, and the manpower, because essentially we've mentioned early on that one person can take up to 2,500, so two person can effectively take up to 5,000 boxes. So essentially you are spreading out your manpower costs into 5,000 units. So electricity will multiply by 5, water will multiply by 5, salt as well, and feed. So it brings us a total of 22,000 for operating costs. So the next thing you'll see that your revenue per cycle is about 120,000, but your crab cost is only 92,000, and your expenses is only 20,000. So your profit per cycle increases to about 11,000 or approximately 12,000. But take note, look at your ROI. Your ROI is only 52 months, which from the original 212 months if you were to run with and without scale. So this is one of the important points I'm trying to bring out, saying that if you have scale, you're effectively spreading out your manpower costs, which brings us to reducing the amount of time needed to break even. So now it's about 52 months. Okay, so in the third case, we'll be running what we call a B2C, sort of a B2C status. So going back to the original basis of 1,000 crabs per cycle, and we are following the same rental cost, testing kits, manpower, electricity, so on and so forth. We are spending about 6,329 a month. So this is the same as the first case we presented. But what if I change my price slightly higher? Instead of 72, I'll be selling them at 80 ringgit per kilo. So this is what we call a B2C market. So one of the most beneficial point of having a RAS system which you can use for urban farming, essentially you are already closer to the consumer, and you could just retail directly to the end consumer, in which they will buy crabs and cook it in their house, or even buy crabs and bring it to the restaurants. Because why do restaurants take such a high margin for crabs? Because they are bearing the risk of mortality. And moving the risk to our side, essentially we can move some of that margin onto our side, which brings us to a higher selling price. So if I were to increase, let's say on average 8 ringgit per kilo, and I look at my revenue, I've definitely increased my revenue, but while maintaining the same costs for crabs as well as monthly expenses. And you can see now for every month we are making about 7 grand, which brings us to a return on investment at about 18 months, which is 1.5 years. Three things we want to show you. The first is that having scale would help you break even faster because of the efficient spread of labor costs. And if you're not able to do that, you could probably think about doing B2C market. So B2C market is a very specific market But however, you need to take note that for B2C, it's relatively difficult to do it at a scale size, but it is very profitable in terms of margin. So this is just two analysis, or what we call a sensitivity analysis between B2B and B2C. So assuming that you have 5,000 boxes, right, you're running at scale and you spend 200,000 on 5,000 boxes, meaning you're spending 40,000 for each 1,000 box, and you have a mortality rate of 12%. So you can see that you break even in about 20 months. Once you have a mortality of 15%, you start increasing more than 2 years, and if you have 18%, you're close to 3 years, and you have 21%, you are about 4.5 years. So what we like to show you is mortality plays a very sensitive part on your return on investment. It is actually more sensitive than capital cost. So assuming the same set that, look at, this is also the case for even the ROI for B2C market. So assuming that you spend 40,000 on each 1,000 boxes, you'll see that having a 21% mortality, you will still need 1 year to break even though you're serving a B2C market. So this is how different capital costs impacts your return on investment. For example, having a mortality of 12% and I'm spending 40,000 on 1,000 boxes, you are spending about 8 months to break even. If I spend more on the capital cost while keeping a mortality of 12%, I need about 10 months. If I'm spending 80,000 on the same system, I probably take about slightly 1 year and 3 months, which is 15 months altogether. So the point of this is to show you the different sensitivity for capital cost and mortality rate. Just on a glance, I would suggest that it is sometimes worthwhile to spend on a more quality system and to reduce the mortality rate, as opposed to buying a cheaper system while incurring a higher mortality rate. In the next tutorial, I'll show you our interactive Excel sheet to sort of model and play around different parameters you can use and sort of try to see how does it simulate in terms of return on investment.